Welcome back to another episode of Lush Life, No Labels, a podcast where I talk about the struggles and joys of self improvement, anywhere from relationships, career, wellness, and more. I'm Fatu. My story of the week this week actually involves my younger brother. He recently graduated from college, and it was cool going to his graduation because I haven't been in college in a long time. And I was talking to him and some of his friends about what their plans are for post college. And he mentioned how he is a little bit nervous about going out into the real world, quote unquote, and officially starting on his adult journey. He majored in computer science and is also interested in writing a book and psychology. So his thinking is eventually he will gain all of the knowledge and skills to combine all of these passions. But he was sort of thinking if he should have gone directly to grad school like some of his friends, whereas right now he is planning to go into the workforce to get some experience. I feel like we've all been there at one point, asking ourselves if we're on the right path. And I told him, honestly, I don't know. I told him graduating from college and deciding what you're doing afterwards is one of the biggest, and actually one of the first biggest decisions that we make to bring us into the world of adulthood. But at the moment where we're deciding, oh, I'm going to go work full time, or I'm going to go into grad school, or I'll take a gap year, of course, we don't know if the decision itself is the right one. When I was his age, I went directly into the workforce because one, I didn't have any money, and I knew that getting the experience would help me prepare for graduate school later, which is what I did. My undergrad was also very pre-professional, so we had something called OCR, on campus recruitment, where they would bring these companies to campus to give us interviews to get us into these companies. So a lot of people that I went to school with either went to, I say a lot, but maybe just the people I know, the people who went into the workforce ended up going into finance, so investment banking, or consulting, which is what I went into. But at the time that I made the decision, of course, I did not know whether going into consulting was the right decision for me. I've probably talked about that before. I think there were some pros and cons of consulting. But when we make these types of decisions on a new job, if we're going to switch or if we're going to move somewhere, we want to do that thing and we hope that that's what's going to happen. Like any other part of life and in any decision, we don't have foresight. We can't tell the future. So we make a decision and hope for the best. But one of the things that really stood out with me and my brother in this conversation was that it made me think about how often we compare our choices to the choices of our peers. When we're graduating from undergrad, we're at the point where everyone is now splitting off into whatever they're going to do and wherever they're going to be. And it's one of those first junctions where we're pretty much out on our own and we wonder if those decisions were correct. So, the theme of today's episode is comparison is the thief of joy. Like I mentioned earlier, my little brother is not alone in comparing himself and his choices to his peers. But this comparison trap is a real thing that happens when we compare our progress, our lifestyle, or our growth to someone else's. I think it's natural to compare ourselves to other people sometimes, especially in the society that we live in. But I do think that it can be a trap. Why is that? Well, because ultimately we only see a highlight reel of someone's life. I think different than 20 or 30 years ago, technology like social media also has allowed us to see even more of each other's lives. And I will come back to that at one point. But these days, we have so much insight into other people's lives, and it does lead us to want to compare ourselves more and more. But again, in my opinion, a lot of this is a trap to compare ourselves. Sometimes we covet what other people have because there's something that we want, or maybe something that we're insecure about in our lives. We've all been there, I'm sure. Admittedly, when I was younger, I compared myself to others. I'm sure all of my listeners, I'm sure we all have. And I'll be a little vulnerable here. Before I moved to the US, when I was still back home in Guinea, I would often be sad and would wish I had my dad in my life as he wasn't around. I was sad because I would see my friends' dads picking them up from school at the end of the day, while my uncles picked me up because my dad wasn't there. When I eventually moved to the US, I suddenly got my wish, the wish that I wanted my entire life. But turns out it wasn't all it was cracked up to be. My parents didn't get along, and my relationship with my dad remained strained. Of course, when I was younger, I thought being in the same household with him is what I wanted, and that's what I desired. Partially because, again, I saw other people with their dads, and it seemed like they had a really good relationship. So I wanted to be like the other kids who had both of their parents. But of course, I didn't realize that my situation was more complicated than that. And at a point after this, I actually wished I could go back to my imagination of my dad than the reality I ultimately got. But I was a kid. Of course, I didn't know what was going on. I just had a desire to be like everyone else and to have that happiness I perceived my friends having. I started with this example of me as a kid because often times when we're children, that's of course where we begin to notice differences between us and our friends or other children at our school. For example, as a kid, you might see your friend has a new Bratz or Barbie doll or a video game and you want that. You see your friend having that game, talking about how fun it is, and that's what you want too, because you're a kid. If your parents don't get you that or don't have the ability to get you that, you might become upset because you want to fit in and you want to have the fun that you see your friends having. You might not even want that game or that toy, but seeing somebody else with it and seeing the happiness is what you desire. So as a kid, you might throw a tantrum, partially because you don't fully understand why you can't have that same toy. And a lot of the time, like I said, you won't be able to explain why you actually want that thing except for the fact that you see someone else with it. And as a kid, you'll probably get over it and move on to something else. In high school, I'm sure we've all compared ourselves to our peers, especially when we hit puberty. Our body starts changing, the way we think starts changing. Overall, we're in a very confusing time of our development. It's like in the movie Mean Girls, if anybody has seen that, where Katie Heron wants to be like Regina George and the people in her clique because they are seen as the cool girls. And Katie wants to be part of the cool girl clique. She wants the attention that they get. She wants to dress like they do. She wants a fancy car like they have. She also wants to live in the big house that their parents have. If you've seen the movie, obviously Katie learns in the end that she's actually happy with a lot of the things that she already has. She loves her parents. She likes the friends that she's made, who may not be the coolest in school, but at least they get along and they have things in common. Even in that movie, Katie Heron tries to diminish her own intelligence just to get the guy that she thinks she wants to be with. But ultimately, she realizes that she should be herself because there are things about her that are great as well. And she doesn't need to be someone else just to be happy with herself. And she realizes as well that the life that she coveted isn't all it's cracked up to be. There are a lot of cons to being Regina George's friend, and she goes through that type of stuff. Now, that movie has a positive ending. In a different movie I've seen, I don't know why I watch movies like this, but there was a movie I saw called The Roommate, which is actually a remake of an older movie called Single White Female. In the movie, there's a woman who at first wants to be like her roommate. She wants to be friends with her. She thinks the roommate has a great life. And eventually, she tries to emulate that life by dressing like her, by looking like her. And throughout the movie, we realize that instead of just coveting and wanting to be similar to her friend, we realize she literally wants to be this person. Of course, the movie's a thriller, so it makes sense. And this movie gets much more dangerous for the roommate because the single white female actually tries to kill the roommate so that she could take her place. So the movie's crazy. But the reason I bring that up is because this woman was comparing herself to her roommate, and she herself was willing to go to the end to basically live in this woman's skin than to try to figure out her own life and really figure out what makes her herself. What is it that actually makes her happy? So, in those two movies, we can see the example of different characters that want to be like someone else and want to live the exact life that they live because they see it from the outside and they feel like that's the life that they want to live. And like I said, in the case of Mean Girls, Katie figures out, you know what, I can live my own life and still be happy. Comparing myself to this person and wanting to be like them actually made my life worse than I wanted. In The Roommate, I mean, Homegirl was crazy, so there's that. But even she saw, the closer she felt to this woman, the roommate, even she saw she'll never be like her because she's not her. And that's what ends up devastating her. And then she continues to be crazy in the movie. But in both of these cases, these characters realize that even if they try to be like that person, something's always going to be off because they aren't that person. They're pretending, or at least they're thinking that they want to be like that. And ultimately, it doesn't make them happy because they never got to the root of what they really, really wanted for themselves. So if you're still with me, you can see, listener, that we compare ourselves throughout our lives. It's not only when we're kids, but we'll do it in high school, we'll do it when we're in college, and we'll do it when we're adults. As adults, I see people compare themselves a lot to other people. People want other people's lifestyles, they want their job, they may think that person's in a perfect relationship, really anything. They want to be in a financial situation exactly like someone else. And I'll talk about this a little later, but comparing yourself to someone isn't bad, but there is a line for wanting to be like someone versus using them as inspiration. To me, those are two different things. For adults specifically, one of the things I've been seeing a lot more is this notion of comparing to other people, especially with social media. With social media, we're now able to see more of other people's lives. We might see them going on multiple vacations a year. We might see their house that they recently bought and how many bedrooms and bathrooms there are. We'll see the clothes that they wear and the outfits that they have and want to dress like that. But I want to emphasize that what we see on social media is only a part of someone's life. Whether this person is your friend, your family member, or a random influencer who you don't know. we are not there with them 24/7. So we actually don't know everything that is going on in their life. But sometimes when we look at that, we say, oh, I want to dress just like this person. Let me try and buy all of those clothes. The reality is, we can buy all of the clothes that that person wore, but it might not look the same on us as it does on them, whether we have different body shapes, different heights, etc. Plus, we might even buy those clothes and not like the way it looks on us because we're not that person. We don't look the same as them. I mention that because clothing is one of those things that I see people often comparing themselves a lot to. Another thing I see a lot of frequent times is people talking about couples that they see online. And they say, oh, they have the perfect relationships. Back in the day, this used to happen with celebrities when we would see them in magazines. We'd say, oh, they seem to have a perfect relationship. They're so happy. But that's all based on what you see online. And that might just be based on one picture that they post on Instagram, a quick 30-second video that you see on TikTok, maybe a reel that they post on Facebook. You're not seeing a lot of things. You're literally just seeing a highlight reel that they specifically choose to show you because they're the ones uploading that photo. But truly, we're never there with that person or that couple. We are not in that relationship 24/7. So there may be things happening in that relationship that we are not aware of or that are not so glamorous. And not to be depressing, but a few months ago, I saw online people talking about a social media influencer. I believe she was also Miss USA or did a lot of pageants that she won. She was engaged. She seemed to be happy and seemed to have the perfect life. But unfortunately, she tragically took her own life. And it was very interesting because I saw many people commenting and saying, oh, I never expected this to happen to this person. She seems so perfect. Everything in her life seems so perfect. I wanted to be just like her. But what her followers didn't realize was that she was struggling with way more things than they know about because she never told them. And that's completely in her right. But that's right there is one of the points that I want to get across for this episode is that oftentimes we want what other people have, but we're only seeing a glimpse of that. If you see somebody with a 5-bedroom house, bathrooms, a basketball court, all of these things, you might want something like that. But what you may not know is that they're in crippling debt and they're struggling to make those payments. And I don't give these examples to say just because you want to have a life like someone else, it doesn't mean that there's some bad thing going on in their life or some secret thing that you don't know about that is actually worse. But the point I'm trying to make is that the grass is not always greener on the other side. And again, you should want things more for you and not necessarily because someone else has it. You might want a 5-bedroom house, but you should want that for you because you have a lot of family coming in or whatever it is. Maybe you just want to have a big place like that. But it shouldn't be because you want to size somebody else up or you want to be just like them. I think that's a very not good reason to want things like that. Because we truly don't know how people are living, and we spend all of our time being upset or comparing the fact that we don't have that life. Meanwhile, we don't know how that person got to that point, what else might be going on with them. And our focus on the comparison takes away from us developing ourselves or figuring out what we actually want. Another example, when I first graduated from undergrad and lived in my first adult apartment, it was super janky. I had a roommate who was a friend of mine. But this apartment was so dilapidated. It was in one of the old brownstones in Boston. And for anyone who knows, Boston is a very, very old city, and there are a lot of things that are not updated. So there was no central heat, no central air, none of that. It had one of those heaters that would basically bang on itself and scream in the middle of the night. And y'all, one of the windows in my room, the top of the window wouldn't stay closed. So the window would always just slide down. In the warm weather, my room would overheat because of the window. And in the wintertime, it would be absolutely freezing because of the window. And even though I put in so many work maintenance orders, they did not care. They never fixed it. And at that time, that's where I could afford to live. I remember I would visit different friends of mine. And for example, there was one friend who I would visit in, and she lived in a different, I think she lived in New York. And I would visit her. She lived in a nice high rise apartment with a pool, a gym, all of these amenities that I could only dream of at the time. And at first, I would compare myself and I thought I was behind because I was like, wait, she's living in this bougie place. Meanwhile, I'm living God knows where. And I felt like I was behind because me and this particular friend went to undergrad together. So I was like, well, we went to the same school, but why is my living situation so different than hers? Like, what am I not doing right? What do I need to do so that I can be like her, so I can live in a building like this and have all these amenities? And the fact is, as I was comparing myself, I started thinking about, well, what were some of those differences? Well, like I said, we went to the same university. This specific friend ended up working in investment banking after school and was paid a lot. She could afford to live where she lived, and she lived in New York. She was only responsible for herself and her bills and no one else. Plus, she grew up in a middle class family with parents who could help her out if she needed. I was not like that. I worked in consulting, which did make money, but not as much money as investment banking. Unlike my friend, I was not from the middle class. I grew up in poverty and didn't have family who could help me. I was also a parentified child and had major financial obligations for my family. So my paychecks were not only being used for me to pay my bills, but I had to give up a lot of what I made. So in the moments where I was beating down on myself and comparing myself for not having a luxurious life like that, I realized that my friend and I were already not starting in the same place, despite the fact that we went to the same school and we were peers. At the time, I became more and more aware of the differences that we had. And it just made me realize that no, my friend wasn't better than me. I acknowledged that we just had different circumstances. What I needed to do was figure out a way to get to a place where I wanted to be. If I wanted to be in a place and rent somewhere where they actually fixed things when they broke, that wasn't dilapidated, that had fully functioning windows, I either needed to make more money to move somewhere else, or I needed to make some boundaries with my family so that I could actually save some money and live somewhere decent. I ended up doing both of those things, but none of that were because I wanted to be like my friend, which is why it was so good for me to really think about what I was actually bothered about. Was I bothered by the fact that she lived in this nice place, or was I more bothered by the fact that I lived where I lived? None of this had to do with her. I think I thought that at the beginning, but when I really sat down and was honest with myself, I was like, no, I just want to level up, but I don't necessarily want to live in I didn't necessarily want to live in a high rise. I didn't necessarily need or want all those amenities. That just seemed like a better life to me because the place I was at was not it. So I'm so happy I did that. And I really had to be honest with myself. It was not easy because I didn't want to admit to myself that my situation is what I really was comparing it to, not necessarily the fact that she had certain things. The things that I did were because I personally wanted to fix something in my life and I wanted a better living situation for myself. But I knew that my friend and I, she wasn't better than me. It wasn't anything like that. One, that made me feel better to realize that about my situation. And two, it really cleared up what I really wanted. And I was able to figure that out and then try to work towards those goals. And then I felt less bad because I wasn't comparing myself anymore to this friend. And that was nice because, again, it wasn't anybody, nobody did anything wrong in this situation. I was never mad, but I did feel bad about myself because I was comparing myself. And when I realized that that's not what I needed to be doing, I needed to more compete with myself. That really started changing things for me, at least for that situation. And this notion of, I wish I had what they have, the wish itself to me takes away from what I really want because I'm spending my time thinking about what somebody else has versus thinking about what do I really want? What is going to make me be a better me or be in a better place than me? Because sitting around like that made me feel inadequate. I was ashamed of where I lived, and it definitely increased my anxiety, which I already had enough of to deal with. So I think a lot about, do I want that because it's flashy, because it'll make me look good in front of other people? Or do I want that because it's something that I truly want? So if I see someone that is wearing some clothes that I like, and suddenly I want those clothes, I probably would pause and think about, do I actually want that shirt that I saw this person in? Or do I see them looking good in it and I somehow think if I get that, then I'm going to look good too in that? Because that may not look the same on me, anyways. And again, there's nothing wrong with getting inspiration or liking a certain style. I'm sure we all have that. It just becomes an issue, at least for me, when I want that thing because of validation or because of like some other reason. And the differences that we have with other people, it's just different. And it's okay to be different. I understand it can be difficult. Like I said, I've given you guys a few examples here throughout my life of when I've been in a situation like this. And I'm not above it. None of us are above it. But I think it's important to really keep in mind in those moments that it doesn't mean that my life is worse than someone else. Whenever I creep into comparing myself to somebody else, I start seeing it as just a different thing, not as a comparison and not as a competition. I see it more as something that I could strive for if that's really what I want, not something that is taking away from me because I don't have that. And we all live different lives. I think we all recognize that. But it doesn't mean that we are better than someone else or that someone is better than us. It's just different. And frankly, the more we compare ourselves to other people, the more miserable we become because we start judging where we are, like I've done to myself. And then we start thinking we're not good enough. And the truth is, there are going to be things in your life that you say, this is not good enough. But you got to be specific. This isn't good enough for me. So what am I going to do about that? We all get to those points too, where we say, I have this new goal. I want to get better at this. I want to start this new thing. There's nothing wrong with that. But you should start it for you, not because you see somebody else with that thing. Because then you start getting into this negative territory of putting yourself down, like I have. And like I said, we all compare ourselves to other people in some way, shape, or form. And I'm not saying this to say don't compare yourself to other people because it can help you in terms of a healthy challenge. But see it as a personal challenge. It could help you get motivation to where you want to be. You can see some of that inspiration. But like I said, just be careful because there is a slippery slope where you start being negative to yourself for that reason. And for me, now I just try to compete against myself. So I think about, okay, where do I want to be? And what do I need to do to get there? I definitely take inspiration from people and I use that as a way to learn. I apply that learning. I don't use it as a way to compete. And life is already difficult. As we all know, the world is already throwing a lot of challenges at us, anyways. The least we can do for ourselves is not be part of the machine that continues to put ourselves down. So, my question of the week for the listener is think about one thing you really want right now, whether it's a piece of clothing, a vacation, a certain house, or a promotion. Why do you want this thing? Do you really want that thing for yourself, or because someone you know has it, or because you want to prove something to someone? Again, there's nothing wrong with these things. But for me, it's important for me to be honest with myself. Because at least if we're honest about it, it's much easier to get to that thing, anyways. So remember, listeners, you are not behind. You are on your own path and your own timeline. Thanks for listening to another episode of Lush Life No Labels. Like and subscribe to this podcast and share with your friends. And tune in next week. I have a special guest coming in who is the founder of a startup focusing on media. So definitely tune in to check that out. Cheers to your lush life and see you later.